Right. Well done for making it. It's a dreary day. So, come to the end of the small project, as it were, where what I've been encouraging you to do is to do something fairly quickly, something within the week. So, I'm going to go drawing different objects the first session, sort of quick drawings. Then last week was focusing on drawing tonal values or painting tonal values. That's my demo from last week. Just using greys, lights and darks really. So the idea is something that you can produce fairly quickly within a session. And I find sometimes that by working quickly I tend to learn a lot more. You know, sometimes there's only so much you can learn by labouring over, you know, painting for weeks and weeks on end. So this week I thought I'd do a bit of a recap on colour mixing and use this little still life setup here that I've got going. So this was actually one of the ones that I did last week from the Thursday group a week ahead. The other thing I mentioned is next week is new month, so we've got February. So the projects I've got for February is a really sort of landscape, seascape, or could be an interior type project. But it's particularly looking into what they call looking into the light, painting into the light, or what's known as contre-jour painting. So it's where you've got a light source in the distance, and then quite often you find things are silhouetted again. So I've got an example here, this one. So things like, in this instance, the light will be back here, and then there's the reflections here, but you know, the people and the buildings all thrown into shadow. So it can create some quite interesting designs, and it's a technique that artists use as a sort of design type thing. And it also has the effect of slightly abstracting things, because you can't always see a lot of detail. When something's thrown into silhouette, sometimes you can sort of simplify and abstract a little bit. So that can be quite an interesting one. So that's the project for next month. So if you've got any references that you want to use, have a look for images where you've got that particular kind of lighting going on. I'll leave this book out. If you want to have a quick browse at this. This was a book I got last year. I won some vouchers, book vouchers, and I quite like this book and I like her work. Jenny Aiken, the name is, and I thought, well, I'll get that one. It's quite interesting. So yeah, that's next month's project. So for this one, I thought I'd do just a quick refresher of colour mixing. So this might be, you know, a lot of you will have heard me talk about this in the past, but if you want a refresher, I think with colour mixing, these are what I think are, you know, a really good place to start by having particularly a couple of each of the primary colours. I like to have at least a couple of blues, so I have a purpley blue such as ultramarine and a greeny blue, so that could be like cerulean or Prussian blue or phthalo blue. Sometimes I'm not quite so worried about the lemon yellow, but you can have like a greeny yellow, like lemon yellow. If you want to make a really bright green, really sort of sharp acidic green, you'll need something like lemon yellow. Orangey yellows I find a lot more useful, but things like the cadmium yellows or what they might call the medium yellow, or there could be various yellows that come into that category. Reds, you can have like an orangey red, so that could be a cadmium red or vermilion or something like that. And you'll find that if you want to make a really bright orange, these two would be the ones to go for. A nice orangey red and a nice orangey yellow. Same with if you're making a purple, like a slightly purpley red. And there's all sorts of purpley reds, things like magenta, rose, crimson, alizarin crimson. They all come into that sort of purpley reds category. And then ultramarine blue, I think of ultramarine as the only purpley blue that I know of, really. Perhaps cobalt might be somewhere near it. But if you want to make a nice strong purple, they're the ones to go for. Now, if you mix, say, this blue and that red, you get something more like a brown, which is, you know, you think red and blue would make purple, but you really need particular reds and particular blues. So that's quite a nice thing to, you know, nice starting point. And they're the colours I would, I'd recommend that everybody has at least, one of each of these. May not be exactly cerulean, it might be some other purpley blue, not purple blue, green blue, but have one of each of these categories. And then so what I've been doing here is just mixing all the colours that I can, using these in white. Okay, so for instance, let's find the white brush. Can't see what I've got here. Right, so this colour was obviously just white and a tiny bit of yellow. I also put a tiny bit of red in with that because it was, it was coming out too yellow. I didn't want it just yellow, so it just made it a little bit more creamy. And also so to make something like a brown for the roof, I used, I can't actually remember, one of these reds and some of the orangey yellow. So just on its own, that's going to make a kind of orange. It won't be quite as bright as using those two. That makes a kind of orange. So to make that a little bit less orange and more brown, just a tiny bit of blue. And what I find is just touching my brush with blue, I put most of it down there and then just mix a little bit of that in. A bit more. It's very easy, quick to go too far. So that starts to go a bit green. So if it's too green, I need a bit more red in it, and then a little bit more blue. And then I'm gradually getting towards a brown there. That to me is a mix of brown. So using a little bit of all the colours. So that could be quite good, say, for the roof area. This front area to me is a lot more yellowy. So I could use a little bit of the brown I've got there and a bit more of the yellow. So add a little bit there, just to try and make that slightly lighter, slightly more yellowy colour. And that works in quite nicely in there, in that area. Lighten that up a little bit. That can come down to there, maybe a little bit browner. Add a bit more of the brown in. The darkest colour I can make, but I need a little bit of the yellow colour for up there. So a bit more. And you find it's a little bit like driving a car. If you're going slightly too far to the green, then you've got to steer back with a little bit of red or something like that. So let's try that on there. Yeah, that's working quite nice. That's as it's not as intense as that, but it's a little bit closer to the colour I'm seeing there. That chimney area. To get the really darkest colour I can get, I can't get pure black, but I find that if I let's do that in a minute. If I just use the dark colours, so the darkest colours would be a little bit of blue and some of the crimson. That gets me a really dark purple. And then just a tiny bit of yellow will just stop that being quite some purple. And if I'm careful about that, I can get a really, it's not quite black, but it's almost like a darkish brown. So this is, if you're somebody that struggles with colour, this is a good exercise just to see how far you can go, just using primary colours. If I had a different blue, then I probably could get darker. So again, if I wanted to get some sort of really dark shades just in here, perhaps a tiny bit more blue. Yeah, that's, it's not black, but to be honest, when you're painting, quite often, if you just put pure black down, it would read a little bit too dark anyway. It'd read a bit like a hole in the painting. So you have to be a little bit careful. And then other areas like down here, it's a little bit more of a grey. So again, I'll add a little bit of white in with that. And you can see it goes a slightly purpley grey. So I can go a little bit lighter in there. That can be in that area. Yeah, and then obviously here, this would be probably the closest colour I've got for the onion would be the Alizarin Crimson. So just pop a bit that down on its own, but it's a little bit more purpley than that. So just a tiny bit of the ultramarine blue. I need to get a fresh palette. And that will just make that a little bit deeper. So that's getting a bit closer to the colour that I've got there. So, yeah, quite a nice exercise if you fancy just trying something slightly different approach. Doesn't have to be as complicated as that, just one fruit we do, or just something simple. So, okay, any questions? We're good. Okay, good to go. Right.
Oh, what paints are they?
These are acrylics. Acrylic paints, yeah. What do you use?
Anything.
Yeah, anything, yeah.